So question 20, working with polynomials, they want us to multiply. So what we have is a monomial. This 3x squared stands for a monomial, and 7x minus 3 represents a binomial. Remember, a monomial, let's see if I have those definitions down here. A monomial is a one term. Now remember, a term, everything is connected by multiplication. So keep that in mind in a term. A, a term can be a number, a variable, or a product of numbers and variables. So a single term expression, if everything is connected by multiplication, we call it a monomial. But to have a binomial, we have two terms. And again, notice terms are separated by addition or subtraction. Now remember, in algebra, subtraction is really seen as adding the opposite. So if we have 7 minus 3, in early grades, this means 7 take away 3. So if we have 7 and we take away 3, we would have 4. In algebra, we have terms. So we have a 7 and we have a negative 3. So in algebra, we don't see this as 7 minus 3. We see this as 7 plus negative 3. So in algebra, we see this as a positive number plus a negative number. So remember, if the signs are different, you subtract. So we're really back to 7 minus 3, and you keep the sign of larger value. Since it's more positive, the answer is a 4. So essentially, these mean the same thing. So a lot of times, we will not use this notation, but we will read it that way. So if I have a 7 minus 3, we really read it as a 7 and a negative 3. We see it as terms. So that's one of the tricks of using algebra skills is recognizing that this doesn't necessarily just mean 7x minus 3. This also means a 7x and a negative 3. So the 7x is one term and negative 3 is the second term. And again, remember the word and kind of implies addition. So there's a lot of stuff that's just hidden in our vocabulary. So to do this problem, notice that again, we can't do what's inside the parentheses. So this is where we use what's called the distributive property. Distributive property means we can multiply through addition. So for instance, if I gave you 3 times the quantity 5 plus 4, we can use order of operations on this problem because 5 plus 4 is addable. So we could change this to 3 times 9, and then we can multiply and get 27. But notice there is a second way of doing this problem. So another thing we're allowed to do is in math is if there is multiplication and addition present, we are allowed to multiply through the parentheses, if you will, distribute the multiplication through the addition. So what I can do is change this to 3 times 5 plus 3 times 4, and then do that math. 3 times 5 is 15, 3 times 4 is 12, and 15 and 12 is 27. So notice that there's two ways of doing it. We have what's called PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponents, multiply and divide at the same time, add and subtract at the same time. Or there's what's called distribute or distributive property. So we have two strategies that we can invoke on this problem. Unfortunately, since we do not have like terms inside the parentheses, we're stuck with using the distributive property as our strategy. So what we're allowed to do is we're allowed to multiply the 3x squared through those two terms. So when we have 3x squared times 7x, so if we have 3x squared times 7x, this is what I'm seeing in my head. So I understand in multiplication, everything can be rearranged. So really, mentally, I'm rearranging the 3 and the 7 together and the x squared and the x on the end. So when I multiply 3x squared times 7, what I'm actually doing is multiplying the 3 times 7, which gives me 21. And then how many x's are we got? We got 2 x's here times another x. So there's 3 x's connected by multiplication. That means that's x cubed. So remember, if you have same bases, you are allowed to add the exponents in that example. Now my next move is to multiply this 3x squared times this negative 3, if you will. So this 3x squared times this negative 3. Well, again, we can rearrange it to say negative 3 times x squared. So I can actually put the negative out in front and then put the 3, then the x squared. Negative 3 times 3 is -9, or we've put down -9, and then the x squared comes along for the ride. So we end up with this binomial, 21x cubed minus 9x squared. Notice these are not like terms because even though the variables are the same, to be like terms, the exponents have to be the same, and they're not. So this would be considered multiplied, but also it's simplified since they're not like terms. So that's when you get into algebraic expressions. Sometimes our answers are not going to be numbers. They're just going to be, in this case, a polynomial, or we would call it a binomial.